Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our third podcast. We have Fred Guttenberg here with us today to discuss the crisis of school shootings and the lack of reasonable gun control measures. But before we begin, I'm going to read a quick bio and then we can jump right into the questions. Fred Guttenberg began his public life after the murder of his beautiful 14-year-old daughter, Jamie. The day after the murder, Fred attended a public vigil in Parkland. While there, the mayor asked him to speak. His words shook a nation. Only 4 months prior to this, Fred's brother Michael passed away in October 2017 from cancer related to his service in 9/11. He was one of the original first responders and was trapped in the World Trade Center as it collapsed. Amazingly, the room that they hid out in did not collapse, and Michael and his team of physicians spent 16 days at Ground Zero taking care of others. Following his involvement in these two distinctly American tragedies, Fred has traveled the country talking about both events, but also talking about perspective, perseverance, and resilience. He discusses pivotal moments in our life and how we respond to those moments. Fred's mission ultimately led him to write his first book, Find the Helpers, and his follow-up book, American Carnage. Fred Guttenberg's professional life previously included over a decade of experience with management with Johnson & Johnson, followed by almost 15 years as an entrepreneur with 19 Dunkin' Donuts, which he sold in November 2016. And just something I'd like to add real quick is a quote that stood out, which is, "For Jamie and our nation's children, I have a dream of reducing gun violence, and I'm dedicating my life to making sure it happens." So with that, Mr. Guttenberg, thank you so much for joining us today. And if it's okay with you, let's dive into our first question.
It is. I just want to say something about the quote. It's actually built off of a quote that my daughter lived her life by that inspired her as a dancer. She didn't create it, but she found it, and she had a sign up in her room with it. She had the dance studio put up a sign, and it was "Dreams and dedication are a powerful combination." And I took my daughter's quote because I always say she stands on my shoulders, pushing me forward. I'm nothing but her voice, and I expanded the quote.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Our first question is, in general terms, can you share your perspective on the scale and nature of both school shootings and getting reasonable gun control measures passed? And is this crisis a distinctly American phenomenon, and why do you think so?
So, a couple of things. I don't refer to it as gun control. We're not trying to control anything. I call it gun safety or gun violence prevention measures. Here's the reality, since you asked about schools first. Excuse me, battling COVID, as I told you before. There's about 115,000 schools in America. Up until 2 years ago, there were fewer than 400 school shootings. It's a very small reality in the context of the total number of schools. Now, in the past few years, there have been quite a few additional school shootings, still under 1,000, but it's a small percentage of the total number of schools. The thing to keep in mind is this. We build our schools today to protect kids and faculty from fire. You have fire alarms, fire drills, fire suppression systems. Nobody's died in a school from a fire since the 50s. And so we need to rethink the modern threat to your safety in schools, and gun violence is the modern threat. It is a real and growing threat. It is not of the size that would lead to solutions like arming teachers, which some people are doing, but it does require that we do more to keep guns out of the hands of those who intend harm to others, and we do more to ensure that guns can't end up on campus. And we do more to ensure that our school buildings are built to prevent carnage when a gun does end up on campus. As for gun violence prevention, listen, we are doing great work. Big things are happening. 2 years ago, the president signed the Safer Communities Act. One of the things it did, and it has a direct impact on school gun violence, is didn't raise the age to 21, but it implemented expanded background checks on those under 21. And the FBI is already having a tremendous result because of those expanded background checks, stopping possible young people from being future shooters. So we're getting the work done. The other thing that has happened across the country in many states, Florida included, um, are red flag laws or extreme risk protection orders, where when someone is a known threat to themselves or someone else, law enforcement has a tool through the courts to go ahead and remove somebody's weapons when they are a known threat. So there's a lot of really big things happening that are, in fact, leading to the first drop in the gun violence death rate that we've seen in decades. So I am optimistic. I am hopeful. There is now an Office of Gun Violence Prevention in the White House that the president focuses on every day. But here's the caveat to hopeful. It's all as good as the next election.
Yeah.
It was created by the president. The executive actions that have been implemented by the president can be undone by a future president. The legislation that was passed, a future president can make it harder to implement. The Supreme Court can get even worse.
Yeah.
So I say this to you because while I am hopeful and good things are happening, you better vote if you want it to continue.
Yeah. Yeah. I 1,000% agree. The next election is everything. Just touching a little bit on the second part of that question, and talking about whether this is a distinctly American phenomenon, are there things within the American culture you think that are crucial to and do contribute to gun violence prevention?
It is a uniquely American problem. And the number one thing in American culture that contributes to it is the number of guns. Okay. A lot of people want to say mental health. Every country has mental health issues. A lot of people want to say video games. Doesn't matter what country you're in, kids are playing video games. What makes America different is the number of guns and the laws that make it so easy to acquire guns. Now, uh, I forget how old you are. I know you're younger than my daughter should be right now. My daughter should be 20.
I'm
And
16.
What's that?
I'm 16.
16. So using the 20-year mark, which is what my daughter should be, if you just go back 20 years in this country, we had just under 200 million weapons in America. Far fewer weapons than population. Now, 20 years later, we are well over 400 million plus ghost guns. We have far more weapons than population. That jump in 20 years is the reason you see a spike in gun violence. That is a uniquely American challenge to have more guns than we do people. The other thing that has happened in 20 years is 20 years ago, AR-15 sales were less than 2% of all guns sold. Now they are over 25% of all guns sold.
Oh.
They are the most commonly sold weapon. And so, again, there's a lot of reasons that happened, but those two facts are uniquely American and the reason for increased gun violence. Don't let anybody feed you any other BS. Yes, mental health is a factor in gun violence, but it is not uniquely American. Video games may be a factor. They are not uniquely American. The number of guns and the access to them is uniquely American.
Okay. So then kind of going back to your point about the election, I know last time we spoke also, you identified the general election as being your main priority right now. So
Yes.
what is at stake in this election when it comes to gun violence prevention in total?
All the work to implement laws through legislation or executive action, all the work to actually get an ATF director approved by the Senate, all of the work to get an Office of Gun Violence Prevention in the White House, all that work is having real results. And what's at stake is all of that work can be wiped out. Okay. Yeah. And so that is what's at stake. The fact that we are now seeing finally a drop in violent crime and crime with guns is a result of all that work. And so anyone who says, well, you can't do anything about it. No, you can. Yeah. And we are. So I would just tell everybody, if you, like me, believe we can do more to reduce gun violence, and if you, like me, believe your life and the lives of those you love is worth fighting for, then just vote. Show
Yeah.
up and vote. If you, like me, want to live in a democracy where we have the chance to be a part of solving this problem, where we have a chance to run in future elections to continue the work to solve this and other problems. This is the election where if you can vote, you better vote.
Yeah.
Because if you don't, you're going to lose the chance and you're going to see the work end and you're going to see America become a more violent place than it already is.
Yeah. Yeah. So looking now from the White House to the Senate, I know getting past the Senate filibuster is super challenging for any federal law. How does that affect your focus for state laws and federal laws?
Well, we need both, right? So there are plenty of states in this country that are doing a great job of implementing laws to reduce gun violence. I could go through the list: New Jersey, New York, California, Massachusetts, Pennsylvania, um, and I could also go through the list of the states that aren't, and they tend to be more southern. But there are states that are doing a really great job, and in fact, the gun violence death rate in those states is lower significantly. So it matters. However, you're only as safe as your closest border. Guns travel from state to state. So when you hear of gun violence in states where that has a good law, and people say, "Oh, well, it even happened in," it's because the guns usually came in from another state. In the city of Chicago, the guns primarily come from Indiana. And so that gets to the need for national laws that will focus on this transportation of weapons from state to state, um, laws that will have national standards. For example, red flag laws or extreme risk protection orders save lives. Everywhere they've been implemented, they are doing what they were intended to do. But I think the current number, only like 27 states have them. It should be the law of the land.
Mm.
And so that's where you need federal action. It's not an either or, it's both. But you must have both. And the filibuster, you're right, it makes it hard. Listen,
Yeah.
to get the Safer Communities Act passed 2 years ago required a bipartisan effort
Yeah.
because of the filibuster. And to get that bipartisan effort, you had to water down what could have been a, a more significant law. But that was to get it bipartisan, which I support the effort to make it bipartisan. However, I wish the filibuster didn't exist. It's a relic of a former time, and it actually makes it impossible to get legislation that the majority of this country says they want passed. The minority holds the majority hostage because of the filibuster.
Mm. So I know when you were talking about being kind of cautiously optimistic here, do you see us ever being at a point where we can have some real, like not necessarily completely watered down reforms?
I think the more people vote, the more likely that is. Listen, we in America for far too long have done a terrible job of voting. And I don't mean we've voted for the wrong people. I mean, too few of us never voted. And so we've ended up with them. We've ended up with the extremes because the majority of people who just want things to work, who don't get crazed with the extreme ideas, they don't vote because they think the system's not working for them, but they happen to sit in the majority. Those who vote are the typically louder ones, the extremes on both sides. um, the more people who vote, the better off we are, and the better chance we have of candidates who represent the majority.
Yeah. Okay. So shifting gears a little bit, in March, Vice President Harris came to Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School and I saw that in a news report, she described it as a moment frozen in time.
Yeah,
What was the impact of her visit, and how does it contribute to the national movement of gun violence prevention?
yeah. I worked real hard with her office to arrange that visit. And when I originally asked, I actually didn't assume that I'd get a positive response. And
Mm,
when she said yes, she would do it, it's a testament to who she is. It's a testament to the way this administration looks at this problem. And so I would answer your question this way. The first impact is how seriously they treat this problem. It's clear in that visit. Um, Walking her through that building, which is a moment frozen in time, it was not cleansed. The blood is still there. DNA is still splattered. Shards of glass. You sit in classrooms now. So when you're all at your desk and you have all your coursework open on a desk, all those desks still have all the coursework placed out on those desks. It is a moment frozen in time. And having the chance to walk her through it so that she can see what happened, the end result, why it happened, how we can do better going forward, um, and also the design limitations of that school building, which are typical of most school buildings, which made it worse. Again, going back to what I said earlier about fire and building schools to protect kids from fire. We need to rethink how we build schools now to protect from gun violence. You need bulletproof doors and glass. You need recessed windows so that if somebody is looking in a door, they can't see when all the kids go to what will be a well-marked safe corner. You need self-locking doors. Had all these things that I just mentioned been implemented and she saw it for herself, the mass casualties would not have happened. And so we need to rethink the way we build schools. And so I was so thankful that she came because she saw the impact of what we're always talking about with school safety. She saw the impact of what we talk about with red flag laws and how that could have prevented this shooting. Um, it is something that I know is already having consequences in discussions in the White House. And hopefully, as they get reelected, will have additional impact in the years ahead.
Do you mind if I ask, when you said you weren't sure if you get a response back, or that a positive response? Is it because normally when you bring things up to politicians, they're kind of hesitant to show out like that?
Um, it's the Vice President of the United
Yeah. She's
States.
she's a busy
Uh,
lady.
and it's not even busy. I, when I put in the ask, I made clear what the building was still like and what
Mm,
she would see. It's usually the kind of thing that if you do say yes to, you send a staffer. The
mm,
fact that she came and shared the emotional reality of what took place there. She saw some of the other parents who walked the building with us become very emotional. The fact that she came and shared that with us, I didn't anticipate she would, not because I thought negatively of her. I just was being realistic.
yeah,
But again, it is a testament to who she is and who this administration is.
yeah. Um, Now going towards your two books. Your second book, American Carnage, is about common myths surrounding gun violence. What are some of those key myths, and how can we focus on spreading fact-based information to counteract them?
Well, the first myth is who we are as a country, right? So it feels like we live in a country without any regard for gun laws, without any regard for safety from guns. And it feels like it's been like this forever, but it hasn't been. In fact, most of this country's history is a country with gun owners and a Second Amendment. We've always had that, right? But that respected the idea of gun safety, of responsible firearms ownership. That didn't change until 1977. Now, I met your dad at the Supreme Court for a hearing
Mhm.
a couple months ago. Last year, the Supreme Court overturned a law, the Bruin Law. It was a law that existed in New York that helped to make New Yorkers more safe. The Supreme Court overturned it. It wasn't some radical new law that people were disagreeing over or paying attention to. It was over 100 years old.
Yeah.
And I tell you that because we always passed laws in America for safety, right? We always did until 1977, when the NRA was taken over by somebody who redirected the NRA, which was once a safety organization, and redirected it into a whole new direction aligned with gun manufacturers and the industry. It was financially beneficial for everyone. But that didn't start until 1977. And for about 10 years, most of the work they did was behind the scenes, funding a lot of research, which was junk research, to be honest, on things like defensive uses of guns. And their studies were horrifically bad and all debunked. But the myth of defensive uses came from that. And in the 90s, they started pushing laws in states and eventually in DC that reflected the idea that America is made up of good guys and bad guys, and all of us good guys need to protect ourselves from the bad guys. And so laws started to change. But that didn't happen until well into the 90s. And it was happening in states. The first big change, though, didn't even happen until 2005. It was when Florida passed Stand Your Ground. And then you saw a bunch of other states follow through. And then since 2005, again, we're only in 2024, we started to see a bunch of states go to permitless carry, some go to open carry. But it's a relatively new idea. We weren't always this way, and we don't need to be. And so that gets the second myth, which is people love to talk about gun violence as being about a whole lot of things. I already told you at the start of this conversation the only two things you need to know. But you have a lobby that takes advantage of every instance of gun violence to push the idea that we need more armed Americans. After the Sandy Hook shooting, one of the slogans, because remember, we take on myths and slogans. I'm going to start a slogan for you. I know you'll finish it. The only thing that stops a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun. That's a slogan that the gun lobby has pushed across America. And it feels like it's been a part of our culture forever, but it hasn't been. It was the NRA's response to the Sandy Hook shooting. And so we wrote the book to take on all the BS, to take on all the lies, all the myths, all the slogans, but also to provide facts, to provide data, to provide a way to talk about this stuff so that as Americans go out and fight for gun safety, they have a tool to use to do it.
Okay. Yeah, I'm trying to think about if it's been, I know you just talked about how it hasn't been that long but for people who grew up in the 70s and that's kind of all they know, how do we kind of move them away from what they have always believed to be true?
Well, sometimes the best way to do that is just to share the truth.
Yeah.
It hasn't, listen, the gun lobby for 20-ish, 25 years had this incredible run of really having a microphone to themselves. Nobody was combating what they were saying or doing. That is no longer the case. And there's a reason why 80-something% of America now supports laws to reduce gun violence, because America does get it. The issue isn't whether America gets it. The issue is, why are there enough elected people currently serving who are holding up the will of what America wants? And that, again, it gets to voting.
Yeah.
Anyone who says their vote doesn't matter,
it does.
The only reason we've been able to do everything we've done in the past 4 years is because people voted. And if you want to do more, your vote matters.
Oh, yeah. And so talking about voting and specific legislation, you've advocated for a bill titled Jamie's Law, which would establish background checks for the purchase of ammunition with the support of the Brady organization. What are some political obstacles, I know we've touched on this a little bit, that you face that have hindered this?
Um, the fact that currently we have too many people. Well, the fact that right now, the House of Representatives is made up by a clown caucus that can't pass anything.
Yeah.
So there's no chance of any legislation getting through it. There just isn't. Um, and the filibuster on the Senate side. Um, this would be a significant way of rethinking how to approach the gun violence problem. I think it would be the most significant thing we can do to save lives. Um, if you go back to what I shared with you earlier about there now being over 400 million weapons in this country, if you are a prohibited purchaser of firearms by law, you are also prohibited from buying ammunition. But there's no requirement for a background check on ammunition. So the quote unquote bad guys with guns
Mm,
who can't buy a gun with a background check, so they steal them, they trade for them, they get them in all sorts of different ways. They can walk into the store and buy the bullets and nobody will check. Okay, so the people who intend harm to themselves or others, usually those are the ones who, again, can't legally buy a weapon. They walk into the store, and even though it's technically against the law for them to do so, because there's no requirement to check, they buy bullets. I want to close that loophole. And if we do, we'll save lives immediately.
yeah. So then talking about what I think to me and obviously to you seems like common sense gun safety, what are lawmakers afraid of? Like, what is the hesitancy here that you see?
Oh, no, I don't think I think those who won't get on the right side of this are not afraid of anything but their base.
Hmm.
They are afraid that the most extreme in their party, the most extreme voters, are the ones who are most likely to vote and that they might actually lose in a primary. They're
Yeah.
afraid to go against their base. They're not leaders, they're weak. Okay? They are weak people. They're not doing what's in your best interest. They're not going to do what's in the country's best interest. And unfortunately, because too few of us vote, they do manage to get elected, especially in gerrymandered areas.
Yeah.
Um, the way to solve it is, again, higher voter turnout. We need to vote.
Yeah. Shifting topics again.
Cheers.
Yeah, I lost the word. On your blog, you write about the what if questions that populate your head about the Parkland shooting. You also mentioned how you've turned those challenging questions into mobilization. How did you go about doing that and reframing your mindset there?
So, not this February 14th, the year prior, I wrote that for that commemoration. I don't call it an anniversary. And I just started thinking through, what if that day had gone differently? What if? What if that shooter didn't show up? What if Jamie had the one more second that she needed? What if this country valued life, really valued life, not saying I'm pro-life, but not really valuing life, which is what we see too much of. What if this country really valued life? What if this country really had laws to protect life? Um, and it was just something that I wrote because I go forward now thinking I don't get my daughter back because too many of those what if questions went the wrong way. But what if I can be a part of doing one thing that
Mhm.
makes sure you get to grow up, go to college, become a mom? What if I get to be a part of something like that? And that's sort of the way I live my life now.
Yeah. I feel like I can not even imagine how tricky it is to kind of dig yourself out of that hole and turn it into a positive scenario. But linking that kind of to your first book, Finding Helpers, and how you
Find the
mentioned,
helpers.
sorry, Find the Helpers. You mentioned that you used to watch Mr. Rogers with your kids, and that one of his most memorable quotes was, "In the midst of tragedy and catastrophe, find the helpers." So how can we all, and specifically high school students, be better helpers?
Well, and the quote is bigger than that. So he talks about whenever there's terrible things happening, whether it's in your neighborhood or across the country, as long as there are policemen, firemen, doctors, emergency personnel, and other people willing to step in, there's hope. And so really and as long as we have helpers like that, you have hope. And so this Find the Helpers, which I wrote within the year that my daughter was killed, is ultimately a book of how I found hope, because of the amazing helpers that I came across this country, not just related to what happened to my daughter, but 4 months before my daughter was killed, my brother died because of his service in 9/11. He got cancer from that. And I just will say to every single person listening to this, it is my helpers who carried me, held me, pushed me, supported me, gave me ideas, sometimes held me back. Um, and I'll be forever thankful for the helpers in my life. We all, at times in our life, have a need for helpers. Don't ever shut others out of your world. Embrace it. Let other people be there for you. However, there's always going to be someone else that may be needing your help. And make sure you're always there for others who need your help as well. It's only together that we get to go forward in a society that is decent and civil. And that is what I hope to do.
And for those of us who are, I know we've talked about voting a bunch, for those of us who are not old enough to vote, unfortunately, yet, how
You'll
can we,
get there.
I know I'm like counting down, how can we help this process as well?
You all have parents, you all have older siblings, you all have friends, you all have relatives. And listen, it doesn't matter the issue. Everyone doesn't have to agree on every issue. In
Hmm.
fact, it's a democracy. You shouldn't agree on every issue. That's part of the beauty of a democracy. But you should be open to conversation, to listening, and to working for the common good. If, in fact, like me, you want to reduce gun violence, you know who to vote for, and you know you need to vote. But if a young person like you wants to know what they can do, you make sure your parents vote. You make sure your older siblings vote. You make sure your older friends vote. You make sure your older relatives vote. Because here's my warning to all the young people, especially those who sit there and say, I don't think I'm getting everything I want. I'm going to sit out this election. Or I'm going to do a protest vote for Kennedy, which is a wasted vote.
Yeah.
Here's my message to you. If you do that, and if the other guy wins, all of the talk that you have about wanting to be a future leader, about wanting to run in a future election, it ends with your protest vote. If the other guy wins, you won't get the chance to be a future leader. You won't get the chance to run in a future election. And so don't waste your vote in 24. We need you. I need young people like you ready to vote in a couple of years. I need young people like you who say you want to be the problem solvers, able to run and do it. Don't waste your vote on a no vote or a protest vote. Vote for democracy. Vote for the person you know gives you the best chance to be the future leader that we know you can be.
Yeah. Okay, well, I think that's a good mic drop ending. Thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate all of your insight and everything you shared with us today.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Talk to you later.